Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you guys don't know who I am, my name is Divyanka and I'm a doctor of pharmacy here in the US. I'm living my best professional life and I'm here to help you live your best and most productive life. This is the next video in my Midyear 2020 series, and today we are talking about first, second, and third round interviews, and specifically what to expect for them. Now, as you guys probably already know, the fellowship process is something that's incredibly unique. I personally have not heard of this type of process in any other academic realm at all, and it's something that is definitely confusing sometimes. You don't know what to expect, and I totally get it because I was there this time last year, and when I was preparing, the easiest way to gather this information was just to ask people who have gone through it. So I thought it'd be helpful to kind of lay out what to expect in the first, second, and third round interviews during the Midyear Fellowship interview process, and hopefully that kind of helps you envision and prepare a little easier. Now, these differences are actually only going to be content-based. There's a lot about the operation of Midyear and the interviews itself that I think adds a lot of stress or uncertainty or just havoc. But because Midyear is virtual this year, we're only going to be talking about the content and the difference in how those interviews are actually structured. I do think that the normal havoc and the running around of Midyear itself kind of gets crazy and crazier as you go through the rounds. But because that factor doesn't exist this year, you kind of don't have to think about that, and it's honestly a pro. I think that tires a lot of people out, having to run back and forth between interviews when you're struggling to schedule your second round and your third round interviews because you just have too many interviews. That's definitely a problem that people deal with, especially when you have to go from one interview to another, and when you have back-to-back interviews, that's just a whole nother mess. So again, I think that there are a lot of pros of Midyear being virtual, and that'll help you guys interviewing and applying this year because that I think really reduces your stress. But before we talk about the differences between each of the rounds, let's talk about the similarities. All of your interviews during all rounds are going to be 30 minutes long. And because they're all at the same time, this actually works to your benefit. You start getting incredibly used to that 30-minute structure of the interview, and mentally and just being able to prepare for that in advance is actually really helpful. You know that the first few minutes are going to be introductions and the last few minutes is going to be exit. So you have about 25 minutes to talk about content, answer questions, and ask your own questions. Now, depending on the round, after the introductions, you'll probably get an overview of the program itself. So then that cuts your time down to 20 minutes, and that leaves you with about 15 minutes to answer questions and then about 5 minutes to ask questions if the interview allows you to have those 5 minutes. Again, each interview is going to be different because honestly, it does depend a lot of the time on just the natural flow of conversation. But most interviewers do strive to have some time at the end to let you ask some questions. Now, that structure that I talked about is also standard between all of your rounds of interviews. You're most likely not going to have a repeat of people from your interviews, even if it's for the same fellowship. Sometimes, of course, you might, but generally they really try to make it different so that different people are interviewing you. They get a different perspective from each person interviewing you, and it works in their favor. But again, that general format is something you can expect. Now let's start talking about each specific round. So the first round interview can actually be different depending on the program. Now, the general options here are a lot of companies like to do almost a preliminary round of interviews. Although it's technically a preliminary round, that does count as the first interview for that fellowship with that company, but it is really introductory. Generally, this is going to be a phone call. Again, a lot of companies like doing this way before that mid-year frame and seeing you in person. This is kind of a phone screen, and this allows them to give you that introductory information, touch base with you, ask you some general questions, let you ask some questions, and again, just have that first touch of communication before, generally in previous years, before you would see them in person at Midyear, if you were granted a second round interview after your phone call. Now, in today's world, because it's virtual, again, that'll just lead to your second round, which is going to be still virtual. Nevertheless, not all companies do this phone screen, but it is pretty standard for most fellowships, so expect for you to have at least a few phone screen rounds of interviews. Now, a lot of you who are interviewing, preparing for Midyear have actually probably already gone through your first round of interviews at least, We're sitting at the week of November 10th. So again, most of you have probably gone through this phone screen round. Here, it is the most appropriate to ask any very specific questions about the fellowship program, kind of admin, operational stuff. How does XYZ work? What does this mean? I saw that you talked about this on your fellowship brochure, but can you talk about it more? That type of information. So again, very basic, very surface type information. Now, if it's a phone screen, it'll actually usually just be with one person. If by chance this was a video, which I think I only had one first round interview that was actually face-to-face via video, then it could be, of course, 1, 2, or 3 people. But generally for first round interviews and just that introductory call, the majority of what I've experienced was just interviews with one person. Usually that one person is actually the current first year fellow of that fellowship if this program is alive and has been alive for the years previous to when you are applying. If not, then it could be the manager, director. So if the program is just starting, this is the first year that they're recruiting, then it could, of course, be the hiring manager, the department lead, the head of the fellowship, etc. Now let's talk about the second round of interviews. So this is, of course, usually at Midyear in person. This year, just because things are so different, this could be actually way before the mid-year date, or it could be during those mid-year dates. But of course, regardless of when it is, it's going to be virtual. This will 100% be a video call because it's that first in-person touch. Now, because every round you're generally going to experience talking to different people from that program, you're still going to have a bit of that introduction. Hey, my name is XYZ, I'm a PharmD, I went to X school, and they might still give you an overview of the program just to make sure you know the details that they want you to know. Now, in the second round, the nature of the questions is of course going to be more difficult. Let's just say this company phone screened, they might have phone screened 100 candidates, 80 candidates, 50 candidates, whatever it is, and they've probably significantly cut out a lot of people between the first and second round because there's just not as many slots. So in the second round, there might be 20 to 40 people depending on the program. They are, again, striving for one. So it's probably going to be around that 20-25 people mark for how many people they're interviewing during that second round. So here they're really going to attack the content of who you are, what you've done, why you want this fellowship, because they're really trying to understand if this program is correct for you and if you are correct for their program. Now, when this was at Midyear in person, because the booths are quite small at Midyear, for my second round of interviews, I generally experienced having these with 2 people as an average, sometimes 1 if the program is small or if they just don't have the bandwidth of people, but 2 is generally how many you would see. Of course, this can be increased. I did have some interviews with 3 people, 4 people, but once it gets past the kind of that 4 people mark, it kind of becomes impossible to really get to you as a person. So I don't think companies even like doing that. The max I've seen is 4, and that was only once for me. I had 3 people once or twice. But again, generally for most of my second round interviews, it was only 2 people. Now, in terms of stress level, how much you prepare or how much interest and how much in-depth information you show, I would say that the first round is just to show that, you're an apt student, you have done well so far, you will be good in this program. But really take the second round seriously. They've, again, significantly cut down the number of applicants and candidates for this round. You have to give them a reason to make sure that you are now one of 5 to 10 people that they'll take to the next round of interviews. This is where you need to show them your true value, why you are such a big asset, and why they should let you get that next round of interview. Now let's talk about the third round of interviews. So even though they've cut down a lot of people between the first and second round, for the second round, there's still so many candidates. So of course you want to make sure that you get to the third round of interviews, but the way you're answering questions and the way that you're talking can still be, in a sense, more general for your second round of interviews. When you get to the third round of interviews, you know that you are up against only 5, 6 other people, and now is your time to really shine. Why should you be that one person that they pick? Of course, generally, this would be at Midyear, and it is usually the last day of Midyear interviews. Again, in this process, it will be during Midyear or at another time that the company has scheduled it with you guys. But again, the same format still stands. You'll probably still have about 2 to 4 people max, generally still about 2 people. But again, this time you know that in the third round, all of their attention is on you. And so this is really where you're going to get in-depth questions that you have to answer. And this is where you truly have to convince them of your value proposition, what you bring to the table, and why you fit their program as perfectly as possible. I keep saying value, but you really do want to just concentrate on that value proposition because that's what it is for them. Out of these candidates, who is going to perform the best from what we can tell, who has the best background and has done XYZ up until now to then show proof that they'll be a great candidate in the future. They're about to invest 1 to 2 years of time into you, into training you, into making sure you are getting that perfect foundation to succeed in the pharmaceutical industry in the future. So they are going to be investing a lot in you. Why should they? You have to convince them of why they should. So overall, basically, you get it. Of course, every round of interview is important. The third is the most important if you get there. And now, usually in a normal mid-year setting, what most companies do, and again, this is just so company dependent. Some companies don't do this at all. Some companies only have 2 rounds of interviews. So this is just generally, but most companies have now gotten to the point where they do have a reception, which you know that they only give to about 4 to 5 candidates. So out of the 10 that they might have interviewed, they give it to 5 candidates. And you again want that reception invite. Now, in today's world, however it's going to happen, of course, there's not going to be any type of in-person reception. But whatever the next step is, you want to get there. So again, each round is important. I would say if you get to the 3rd round, it is incredibly important because you know that you're up against the best candidates that these people have gotten, and that should definitely make you excited, but also you want to focus on ensuring that you're showing them what you bring to the table. The last thing about 3rd round interviews is this is actually probably going to be with someone more higher up. So overall, that's how these programs transition who interviews you. At the beginning, it's the preliminary 1st-year fellow. Then your 2nd round might have the 1st and 2nd-year fellow, or the 2nd-year fellow and a program director, or someone else who works in the department, someone else who used to be a fellow, etc. Someone a little more higher up, a little more experienced. And then the 3rd round might be with the program director, a VP, fellowship head, etc. Again, someone a little more senior. So in terms of who is interviewing you, that's what you can expect. You can expect to have conversations with people of more seniority as you go through the ranks of each interview. This, of course, makes sense. The person that is more senior will be interviewing for the 3rd round where they only have a few candidates, but it's the best candidates, and you do want someone who is experienced to come in and be able to gauge the differences between the candidates, etc. So that is what you can expect on a personal level of who you're talking to. And content-wise, again, it's going to get more challenging and more focused as to what you're bringing to the table and why you want the program throughout your interviews. So that was just a really good overview of each of the rounds of the interviews. Again, this is definitely a generalization. If you guys have a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round interview that just does not mimic what I said here, just know that of course that's a possibility. Each program is to their own and each program has its little differences, but generally this is the standard that I have seen through all the interviews that I did last year. As always, I really hope this was helpful. If you guys are applying and are in the crux of the fellowship application process right now, again, you've probably gone through a few interviews by this point, but keep preparing. Keep making sure that you're on top of not only the information that you want to talk about, but information about the company. I actually have a video about how I researched pharmaceutical companies for interview prep. So if that's of interest, go ahead and check that out. But overall, just keep your head high, stay motivated. It is a long and tedious process. Trust me, been there, done that, but it is well worth it. Put in the time, put in the effort, prepare, keep yourself engaged, have amazing, interesting conversations through these interviews. Truly allow yourself to show your best self in these interviews. And the only way to do that is to prep, to be calm. You need to know yourself, understand what keeps you calm, understand what helps you perform the best in these interviews so that, again, you can go in prepared with a calm mind and be ready to just have a great conversation. I'm going to stop blabbering on. You guys have preparing to do. I should stop talking. So that is it for this video. I hope this was helpful. As always, you guys will see me in the next one.